So our next section is about multiplying polynomials. I'm going to start by doing a quick review of how to do the distributive property. If this is super easy for you, feel free to just work these problems out on your own and fast forward through the video. Otherwise, watch carefully, make sure you understand it. So number one, when we use the distributive property, that means we take this 5 that's outside of the parentheses, multiply everything inside by the 5. That gives us 5x. We also have 5 times 8, which is 40. And that's actually all our answer is. We don't have to do anything else from there. We can't put anything together because nothing is like terms. 2 involves the exact same process, except that we start with 5x times x. So 5x times x is going to give us 5x squared. We also have 5x times 8. That is going to give us 40 times x. So if these were kind of new to you, maybe try numbers 3 and 4 on your own. So then number 3, I'm going to go ahead and distribute this 3x. I do 3x times 1x. That gives me 3 times x to the second. I'm also going to do 3x times minus 9. That gives me minus 27x. Once again, for these, you cannot do anything more. You keep it like this. The key thing when I ask you to multiply is make sure that you get rid of the parentheses. Be sure that you are reading the directions because there's other things that we do with this stuff, but in this case, I'm asking you to multiply. Number 4, I think, goes one step further. So we're going to distribute this 3x to both the 4x and the 9. So we start with the 3x times the 4x. First thing that we're going to do is 3 times 4, which is 12. Next thing we do is x times x, which gives us x squared. For the second part of this problem, we're just going to do the 3x times the minus 9. That gives us minus 27x. And that's all we do for that one. So for the last two problems, we are going to distribute the 3x to the 4x squared and the 3x to the minus 9. 3x times 4x squared gives us 12. X times x squared is x to the third. If you want, you can put a 1 in with that x, just to show yourself that you're adding your exponents. Then we get minus 27x. And that's my answer for that one. The last one of the distributive property is one of the more challenging ones. So we're going to go ahead and distribute 3x squared times 4x to the third. You start with 3 times 4, which gives us 12. X to the second times x to the third gives us x to the fifth. You're going to add your exponents. 3x to the second minus 9x. We're going to start with our 3 times 9, which gives us 27. X squared times x to the first gives us x to the third. So those are our answers for those ones. Do not try to simplify once you've multiplied it out. Remember, I'm asking you to multiply, so this is all that we're going to do for these answers. I'm going to give you one more type of problem that has to do with the distributive property. This may be something that you have not seen before, but it involves the same exact method. So for this one, I have 2x to the fifth times the quantity x to the second plus 3x minus 8. So you might notice that this one I have a monomial multiplied by a trinomial. In the previous ones, it was a monomial times a binomial. This is the exact same process, however. All we're going to do is take this 2x to the fifth and distribute it to all three of these values. So 2x to the fifth times x to the second is going to give me 2x, don't forget to add your exponents, to the seventh. And then I'm going to do similar things with the other two. 2x to the fifth times 3x to the first, if you want to write the 1 you can, gives me 6 times x to the sixth. 2x to the fifth times negative 8 gives me minus 16x to the fifth. That's all I do for that problem. I can't do any more because all I have now is some stuff together that's not like terms. So my next type of example, you may have seen before, and you may have heard of the method that you use in previous classes. So we have a rule, and that is that when you are multiplying two binomials, that's what this is, you are going to use what we call the FOIL method. So in the FOIL method, we're going to use the first letters of 4 words, and the first letters actually are going to spell out the word FOIL. So I'm going to start with F, which is going to stand for my first terms. The next one, the O, is going to stand for my outer terms. The I will stand for my inner terms. And the L will stand for my last terms. So I will explain what I mean by that. So starting with my first. In these two binomial parentheses, the first thing on the left-hand side is my x. The first thing on the right-hand side is my 2x. So I'm going to start by doing x times 2x. That gives me 2x to the second. The next thing is my outer terms. So on the very outside of these two parentheses is this x and this minus 1. So I'm going to multiply minus 1 times x. That gives me negative 1x. Or you can just write it as negative x. The next one I'm going to do is my two inner terms, so the inside of the parentheses, which is the 4 and the 2x. When I multiply those together, I get 8x. And finally, I'm going to do my last two terms. So I'm going to do 4 times negative 1. That gives me negative 4. Now, I'm not done with this problem. Just be careful. Make sure you finish everything up. I still need to combine like terms. In this case, I actually, whenever I'm using the FOIL method, I will most likely have like terms. So just keep that in mind. Do not forget that step. Otherwise, you'll do all of the hard stuff right, but you'll miss something that you know how to do. So the only like terms I have are the 1x, the minus 1x, and the 8x. When I put those together, I end up getting 7x. So my answer is 2x squared plus 7x minus 4. The key thing to know about the FOIL method is it's not really any different from the distributive property. The thing is that you're distributing the x first to the 2x and the negative 1, then you're distributing the 4 to the 2x and the negative 1. It's just like the distributive property done twice. So we call it FOIL so that we remember to do all of the terms, so that we remember that we are going to have 4 things. So I would like you to try this next one on your own. Use the FOIL method. So give it a try. So similar to the previous one, I'm going to use FOIL. I start with my 4x and my x. So 4x times x gives me 4x squared. Next thing I'm going to do is my 4x and my minus 3. 4x times negative 3 gives me negative 12x. Next is going to be my inner terms, which is my negative 2 and my x. So then I have minus 2x. Finally, I have my last terms, the negative 2 and the negative 3, which gives me plus 6. From there, I only need to combine my like terms. I get 4x squared minus 14x plus 6. The one thing I want to warn you about is many of these types of problems, not all, but many of them, will end with a trinomial like this. So just be careful. The number one mistake people make on these is they multiply 4x times x and they forget that it's squared. So just make sure that you're watching closely. You usually will end with a trinomial like this, even after you simplify everything out. So this next type of problem is a harder version of the FOIL method. So I'm going to show you how to do it step by step. You're going to start with 3x to the third times x. That gives me 3x to the fourth. You follow that by negative 4x times x. That gives me minus 4x to the second. You then will end up getting 3x to the third times 8. That gives me plus 24x to the third. Your final answer is going to be negative 4x times 8. That gives me minus 32x. So now this is one of the few cases where you actually don't get a trinomial. That's fine. Don't worry if you don't. But you might want to double check it. If it's in the same format as 4 and 5 were, then it will be a trinomial, but this one is a little bit harder, so it's not. The last thing I'm going to ask you to do on this problem is to put things in order from the highest exponent to the smallest exponent. The only thing I need to really do there is change these two things around, the negative 4x to the second and 2x to the third. Just be careful when you switch things around. The 4x to the second is negative. It should stay that way. Do not lose that minus with it. Do not put the minus with the 2x to the third. That will change the whole problem. So this is my final answer. So we have one more type of problem, and that is 4y minus 3 times y squared plus 8y minus 6. So you'll notice this is like the ones that we did with FOIL, but a lot more stuff going on. There are two ways to do this problem. I'm going to show you both. So the first thing you can do for this is you can use the distributive property for everything. So what you need to do is you need to take this 4y, multiply it by everything in the second parentheses. You do the same thing for negative 3. You multiply by everything in those parentheses. So I'll show you what you get when you do that. You start with 4y times y squared. That gives us 4y to the third. Then you have 4y times 8y. That gives me plus 32y. Then you have 4y times minus 6. That gives me minus 24y. From there, you're going to do the same thing with the negative 3. I get negative 3 times y to the second. And then I have negative 3 times 8y, which gives me negative 24y. Then I have negative 3 times 6. That gives me plus 18. The last thing I need to do is to combine all of my like terms. So I'm going to start with my 4y to the third. I only have one y to the third, so I'm just going to rewrite that as 4y to the third. Next is my y to the second. So I only have one of those, which actually I made a mistake on. So I should have gotten 32y to the second. So I'm going to now combine those properly. I get my 32y to the second and my minus 3y to the second is going to give me plus 29y to the second. Next comes my plain old y's. I have minus 24y, minus 24y. That gives me negative 48y. The last thing I have is just this 18, so I'm going to just write plus 18. So this problem was a little long and complicated, but it's not really much different from the previous ones that you've done. It's just a little bit longer. So I'm going to show you the second way to do this type of problem. So the second way for the type of problem that we had in 7 and now 8, it involves the same exact steps, but they're kind of going to be organized in a different way. So I sometimes like to organize this vertically so that it kind of looks similar to the stuff that you learned when you first learned how to do multiplication. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this negative 5, and I'm going to do negative 5 times 1, negative 1, that gives me positive 5, and I'm going to write the plus there. Then I do negative 5 times x, so I'm going to do the negative 1 first, I'm going to do the x second. Negative 5 times x gives me negative 5x. Then I do negative 5 times 6 to the second power, that gives me negative 30x to the second. I will do the same exact thing with my 9x. I have 9x times negative 1 first. I am going to get negative 9x, and actually I'm going to shift over to the left because I would like to line up my things that are like terms. And you'll notice that negative 5x and 9x are like terms. Next, I have 9x times x. That gives me positive 9x to the second. The last thing I have is 6x to the second times 9x. That gives me positive, you can write the plus or you can skip writing the plus, 54x to the third. From there, I'm just going to add straight down. So I have a 5. The 5 is alone. I just keep it as plus 5. Negative 5x minus 9x is going to give me negative 14x. Negative 30x squared plus 9x is negative 21x squared. The final thing I have is 54x to the third, and it's positive, so I'm just going to leave it like that. For all of these problems like 7 and 8, it is your choice which way you want to do it. You can do it the vertical method as an 8, or you can do it the horizontal method as I did in 7. Feel free to choose either one. So now I'm going to do a few problems that are only for the honors class. So if you're in CP, you can feel free to either watch them because they might be bonuses, or if you're in CP, you do not need to watch them. However, if you're in honors, I do want you to watch the next few problems. So my first problem is going to involve multiplying, and I want you to actually simplify in addition to multiplying. So I'm going to say simplify the expression. The first one I have is 3x times the quantity x minus 8 plus x minus 8 times 2x plus 6. Now, if you are feeling good about this, go ahead and try it on your own. If not, I'm going to do it right now. The way I'm going to do this problem is I'm going to do the stuff on the left-hand side together, and I'm going to do the stuff on the right-hand side together. You might notice the stuff on the left-hand side is actually an example of using the distributive property. So you're just going to get 3x to the second minus 24. I'm going to add my plus in between. The stuff on the right-hand side is actually a really good example of using the FOIL method. So I'm going to start with x times 2x. That gives me 2x squared. Then I do x times 6. That gives me plus 6x. Then I'm going to do negative 8 times 2x. That gives me minus 16x. Finally, my last thing is going to be negative 8 times 6. That gives me minus 48. The last thing I need to do is put all of my like terms together. There are a bunch of them. So starting with my x squareds, I have 3x to the second plus 2x to the second, which gives me 5x to the second. Next, I'm going to do my next highest term, which is my x's. So I have 6x minus 16x. That gives me minus 10x. Finally, I have negative 24 minus 48. When I put those together, if you can't do that in your head, that's fine. Feel free to work it out on the side. I will not take off points for doing that. In fact, I'd prefer that rather than just reaching straight for your calculator. You will end up getting minus 72. And that's my answer. Our last type of problem, which is still, once again, is either a bonus for the CP or only for the honors class, involves two things here. You have to use both the distributive property and the FOIL method. It is your decision which you want to use first. So I'm going to show you the first method to doing it, and then I'll also show you the second method. So the first method is to distribute first. So distributing first means that you would start by taking this 5x and only distributing it to the first binomial, so the first parentheses. Then inside of your first parentheses, you are going to now have 5x to the second minus 5x. Then you keep that in parentheses and don't do anything else with it until you start the next step. Now the next step you might recognize is the FOIL method. So we're going to do our first 5x to the second times 2x, which gives us 10x to the third. Then we have 5x to the second times 8, which gives us 40x to the second. Next we have 5x to this 5x times negative 5x times 2x, that gives me minus 10x to the second. And last of all, I have minus 5x times 8, which gives me minus 40x. From there, I have to put together my like terms. I get 10x to the third plus 30x squared minus 40x, and that is my answer. So then method 2 for this, and it doesn't really matter which of these you do, it depends on what's easier for you. So method 2 involves, instead of starting with your 5x and moving that around, it involves using the FOIL method in the beginning and keeping your 5x out front. So if you do this, you start with x times 2x, which gives you 2x squared, followed by x times 8, which gives you plus 8x. Next is going to be negative 1 times 2x, which gives you negative 2x. And finally, negative 1 times 8, which gives you minus 8. Then you simplify the stuff in your parentheses. The only thing you can simplify is these x's. And finally, you are going to distribute this 5x. When you do that, you get 10x to the third plus 30x to the second minus 40x. You'll notice I got the exact same answer both methods. It is your decision which one you want to do. You'll get the same for both.